inaugural episode of Season 3, I sit down with Frank Artez. Frank is a former police officer and a cybersecurity expert, and we dive right into several hot-button controversies, including police morale post-George Floyd, gun confiscation, police brutality, police standards post-Uvalde, and police corruption. I was pleasantly surprised how much I learned from Frank during this section, and it was definitely worth the time. We also joked about hand grenades in Sweden, which after the show we found out is no longer legal, so don't get your hopes up. We also spent time talking about the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Balkanization of technology, the Ukrainian Cyber Army, cyber letters of marque, and how modern tech can be leveraged to correlate and decloak special operations. With that, let's jump into my talk with Frank Artez. Hello and welcome to the RSnake Show. Today I have with me Frank Artez. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. Frank and I are old friends. I try to do the math. I think it's like 13 plus maybe years.
Yeah, it's a ridiculous amount of time.
Yeah, I was trying to figure it out the other day, and it'll become relevant to this podcast the very first time we met, but I'll get to that in a minute. I was just pleasantly surprised, or I guess I kind of already knew this, but it's sort of back of my brain that you've been yelled at by James Cameron,
Yes.
Chris DeBeck in the next room. He's been yelled at him many times. I've only been yelled at him once that I remember.
I may be the only one that has the T-shirt that says Jim Cameron yelled at me and I still work here.
Yeah.
So that's,
Chris, how many times were you fired by James Cameron?
I was fired 4 times in 5 years.
Okay, great.
Wow.
So I was just laid off once, but I think that's kind of a claim to fame.
my first encounter with him was 30 minutes of him yelling until I finally figured out who he was on the phone. I was called into a conference call.
Oh, you didn't know who he was?
He was. Well, I knew who he was, but I didn't know that was him. And
just thought some random guy was yelling at you.
Oh, I was picking up clues the whole way. I was driving back into the office, and my boss. I saw that it was my boss calling me, so I answered the phone, and he didn't say a thing, and suddenly I was bridged into an ongoing conference call, and there's this guy yelling.
Some guy.
And I'm trying, and I had no intro. I had no, hey, heads up. It was just this ongoing conference call, and there's this man on the phone, and he's definitely passionate about what he's talking about. And as I'm driving in LA traffic, trying to get back into the office in Hollywood, I am
with probably spotty cell reception.
Very spotty cell reception, and I'm driving a manual, and there's traffic, and I'm trying to figure out why am I on this call, so I'm being very quiet, and then I'm like, is this a mistake? Like, did he accidentally bridge me into a call? And then literally, as I'm reaching the studio lot to park my car and so forth, the penny is starting to drop on who this is. And the particular film that we were working on at the time was kind of the big clue, because as the passion, kind of expanded on what he was talking about, I started to pick up what the topic was, which was it was the movie Avatar. But,
I haven't heard of that. What's that about?
It's a big blue alien movie. And the code name for that movie was the Pandora Project. And during the phone call, enough clues had been dropped that I picked up over the last 10 or 15 minutes of the first portion of the call what the general topic was now, at least. This is like the weirdest situation ever. And the passionate individual on the phone call kept referring to it as his film. Which
it's a pretty good indicator.
So at first I was like, is this Fox? Is an executive from Fox that's on the phone? And so forth. And then no, I started to pick up probably right after I had answered a question that was rhetorical. It was shortly after that in his retort that I suddenly had the epiphany of exactly who was on the phone call. And I remember getting to the lot, and I went up into my boss's office, and I turned off my cell phone as I walked into his office, and he was casually sitting behind his desk with his desk phone on mute and also on speaker. And I walk in and I look at him, and he kind of looks up at me, and I look over and I see the red light is blinking to let me know that it's on mute. And I was like, am I fired? And he was like, I don't know if I can say what he told me.
Go ahead.
He looks at me and had a very London accent. And he looks at me and goes, Frank, why don't we just chalk this one up to you don't know what you're fucking doing yet? So, yeah. It's
a fast way to learn.
It was a fast way to learn. And word got around very quickly. And I went over to, had a meeting like an hour or two later over at with the general counsel of the company at the time. And the assistant general counsel waved for me to come into her office, and we're pretty good friends. And I'm like, hey, she goes, hey, I heard you got yelled at by Cameron on the phone today. And I was like, yeah, I didn't even know who it was for like the longest time. And then when I realized who it was, I just shut up. Right.
It's always
and
the
she goes, hold on a second. She opens up like the big desk drawer, the big one that's, on the right side of most old fashioned desks. And she rifles through there for a second. She pulls out this white t-shirt that has giant black script on it. And it says, Jim Cameron yelled at me and I still work here. And I was like, you just keep those in your drawer? And she goes, no, they gave me 2 last week. He yelled at me last week. So he goes, you can have this one. Yeah. So that was my introduction to Mr. Cameron.
That's funny.
Yeah.
So you and I first met through a mutual friend. You probably don't remember this, but it was a random party I was having at my house, just a small amount of people showing up. I was fairly new to town. So he's like, oh, I'm going to come over. I'm going to bring a friend. I'm like, oh, no problem. So he comes over and you show up. I've never met you, know nothing about you. Like, hi, my name's Frank. I'm Robert, kind of whatever. And about half an hour into you being at my house, you said something about, arresting somebody or pulling somebody over or something. And I'm like, oh my God, are you, and like I think I said it politely. I think, excuse me, sir, are you a police officer? And you said yes. And I'm like, okay. I'm like looking over our mutual friend. I'm just like going to deck him. Like, what the hell, man? Like
party foul.
Super big party foul. Yeah. But it's not like I was doing any drugs but he doesn't know that. I mean, there's no way. Still to this day, I want to smack him around for that one, but it was actually really fun meeting you.
It was.
And years later, we got a chance to work with one another. And so, but I first knew you not as a security person, which now is how I think about you, but I first knew you as a police officer.
Right.
So I'd like to kind of take it in that order, if you're okay.
Absolutely.
Start talking about the police aspect of it. So I literally just found out today that you are no longer a police officer.
That is correct.
And it was as of yesterday or the day before?
Like a week ago, I think.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So this is a very new thing.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Are you willing to say what happened that made you choose to
I think at this point in my career, my focus is definitely different than it was before. And the department that I was working with has gone under a lot of changes, shall we say. And the people that I enjoyed working with for 18 years mostly had now retired. So it was one of those, do I want to really take part in the new department and so forth? And, or do I want to go look for something else?
Got you.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if you knew anything about this, but there was this kind of a big incident with George Floyd that happened a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And it was kind of an enormous deal.
Yeah.
Just seeing how
I don't mean to laugh at it. I'm laughing at your paraphrasing of it. Yeah.
I think it's worth asking you the question, like, what was the morale like in the police department kind of before, like, just kind of an average day before all that happened, and then sort of afterwards, and then up till today? Like, what do you feel like has changed?
There's always the tug of war, the difference in perception, right, between people that work in law enforcement and then people that observe them, right? And it's probably very akin to my perception of the quarterback on my favorite football team and his perception while he was in the middle of the field about to get crushed by men who weigh twice as much as me, right? And it's always, that juxtaposition that happens between individuals. And that's fine. That will always remain, right? But for the most part, morale with police officers is usually pretty good from the standpoint of they're, by and large, almost all of them are there literally, and as quirky as it sounds, to help other people. And this is the career that they wanted to do because of that. Yes, there are always those officers or people there that they're just the same as there are in any other career field that are there because of the power trip or because of the status or whatever. And that's where their head is, which is not where their head should be, because it should be a position that you're in because of your heart. Right. And, you know, I remember the comments back and forth in text messages and so forth with other police officers that I knew, when that incident hit, and you're watching the same thing on TV that everybody else is watching. And it was one of those where you've watched other things, right? You've watched, you know, another arrest, or, you know, where somebody looks like something was happening, or it was the position, or it was the footage was started somewhere after,
in the middle of the
like in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. So you're looking at it and you're going, well, how did they get to this point, right? And in that particular one, there isn't a need to ask how we got to this point. What was happening, every single police officer I knew was looking at it and going, like, they all did like that German Shepherd face, where the German Shepherd just looks at you for the treat and is like, huh? Like, it was like, what is going on here? Mm-hmm. You know, so that was interesting change, but then the change in society, right? The protest that took place, the open hostility and so forth, calls for defunding the police, but really with no definition of what that meant. I know some people like to argue on what it means, and that's great. That's your opinion, but nobody ever actually came forward with here are the 45 points of what I mean when I say defund the police, right? We'll just take it at the English definition of the words defund and police, mm-hmm. you know, put together in a sentence.
Right.
And that really changed. So you saw mass resignations, right? And unfortunately, you were seeing mass resignations from the people you wanted to keep.
Is that true?
In the police department? Yeah.
So you thought the higher quality ones were the more likely to leave?
Yeah, the ones that were trying to do great work for society, that were now looking at it and going, oh, well, wait a minute, society just doesn't appreciate us, mm-hmm. right? And why am I doing this, right? Because at the end of the day, when you look at skill sets, right, that a lot of these individuals have, especially somebody like me. Now, I worked backwards, right? I was doing information security and high tech, and then went to do police work because I noticed nobody with my skill set was staying, right? And society needed somebody that can do computer forensics and understand high tech crime and so forth. You know, and you'd train people up and they'd leave and they go make, you know, $150,000, $200,000, you know, somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And, you know, those officers were looking at it at that point and going, well, I've been doing this because of my heart and because of wanting to do something for society and help society. And now, you know, the future is unclear, and this is amazing how we're being attacked. And I'm not saying they're right or they're wrong. It's just that was their view, just like mm-hmm. the people who were protesting had their view. Yeah. And I feel we lost a lot of, you know, very good quality officers. I know quite a few that I know personally that I really wish were still police officers.
And what do you think they would say if they were here about the rationale for leaving? Because they're there to help people, mm-hmm. and people still need to be helped. So what is it about that climate specifically that's so toxic that makes it not possible for
I think it was the
fact
job? That they were going out on calls and they were now being, you know, verbally assaulted, or people were purposely putting themselves in the way, preventing them from doing their job without detail, right? You're trying to arrest somebody and suddenly everybody else is trying to jump in between you and tell you that you can't do it. And there's cell phone cameras in your face from all directions. And, you know, you're there because somebody called 911 and said that they were in fear for their life, or somebody was trying to hurt them, or somebody harmed them by stealing from them or something like that. And, you know, you can't do the task that you're at, and suddenly you're trying to explain everything that you're doing when all you're trying to do is apprehend, you know, the individual that was causing a problem, where you're just trying to show up, especially in Texas, because we're more peace officers than we are really law enforcement officers, and you're trying to show up and just restore the peace, and you can't do that when you showed up and all of a sudden people are,
that's an interesting distinction. I've
things.
Not heard that before. Mm-hmm. So what is the delta between those two things?
So in Texas, it's very interesting. You'll if you look at our occupations code, you'll see that by and large, there's only 2 times that I need to arrest somebody. Everything else is actually up to the discretion of the peace officer. The peace officer's job is to restore the peace, right? So, if it wasn't for civil suits and so forth, you probably see more officers acting what we might call old school. And that is, I'll give you an example.
Like fist fights, like let them duke it out kind of thing? Is that?
Well, mutual combat's a whole other thing. It's actually allowed in Texas. But I'm talking more about things like, you're 2 blocks from your house and I pull you over and you're intoxicated, right? Old school might have been, we're leaving the car on the side of the road, giving you a lift the rest of the way to your house. And if I see that car moved, then I'm going to arrest you.
Sure.
Right. Versus I'm going to arrest you because if I don't, people are going to get sideways. And, oh, by the way, you're now going to go through all living hell, lose your license, probably lose your job, right? You're going to be paying $1,000 a year to keep a driver's license, like all these other problems that are now going to pop up in your life. Versus the peace officer being able to use discretion and figure out what is the best way to solve for this problem.
To de-escalate the danger to the public.
The danger to the public and restore the peace. So in Texas, really, assault family violence, the obvious aggressor has to go to jail, period. It's written in the code, right? The only other time a peace officer has to arrest somebody is if a magistrate points or tells them, arrest Robert, right? I have to. If I don't, I get arrested. That's it. Everything else is actually up to the discretion of the peace officer in the state of Texas.
Interesting. And how common is that across the different states or world as far as you know?
I think it's common from state to state, but Texas has some insulations to help it where you can't litigate very often against a peace officer if they were doing their job. Whereas if you look at a state like California, for example, where you can sue the police department because of anything, and then their reaction is to put in more policies and procedures and dictate how the officer has to operate, right? Because half of their lawsuits or more, that's a hyperbole, are based upon, were they trained correctly, right? Well, did I need extra training to say I had to take Steve to jail because he was, drunk in public, or could I have given Steve a lift home, right, and put there? Did Steve fall and hurt himself after he went to the house? Yeah. Did Steve get to sue me because after he was at his home and I left him alone, he fell and hurt himself, arguing that I should have taken him to the hospital? So these are the things that change how, unfortunately, police have to start interacting with society. And in Texas, we have a lot of protections which help us so that we can maintain on the side of, no, I just brought Steve home, right? That might change if you're downtown in a city, right? And you're causing a scene and so forth versus, you're at a country bar or, you're in a small town bar and they're just like, all right, we're gonna give you a lift home. I don't have to actually arrest you.
Right.
So, yeah.
Very interesting. I was not aware of that. So I want to ask just kind of a fun question because I kind of already think I know your answer.
Sure.
What does the police think of the TSA? Does this kill you?
It kills me.
Okay, what's your feeling about the TSA? How about that?
I think at one point in time I made the joke that I've put more TSA agents in jail than the TSA has caught terrorists. At the end of the day, I mean,
and how did that come about?
That's several of those are very long stories. Okay. But usually for sticky fingers, I don't know if it's still ongoing because I don't look into it anymore. But at least at one period in time, they had a lot of problems with it. Searching through bags and then things go missing and that kind of thing. But when you look at the job that they're given, it's like, well, where's the problem, right? So is the problem really them, right? Is it who we're hiring, or is it because the job that we're hiring for isn't our image of what we think the TSA should be doing, right? So at the end of the day, they are security guards who inspect, looking for weapons and so forth, contraband going onto the aircraft, but not contraband as in you have a kilo of cocaine in your bag. We've had instances where they've stretched that a little bit and so forth, but really, they're not law enforcement, right? So they're not arresting people. They don't have those powers. and because of that, the threshold in hiring them is where you would expect security guards to be at versus, law enforcement or federal agents or so forth, right? Yeah, the professionalism isn't really there. So you end up with what you end up with, and there's nothing that I can say that is wrong with that. They're doing the best job that they can, and I try my best when I'm, both from the information security hacker mentality and the law enforcement mentality. When I go through an airport, I do my best to keep my mouth shut and just, watch the security theater and, kind of get through it myself and not make comments to them like, is that really how they taught you to frisk somebody? So, if you
really got to grab it.
I know, like if you take any longer, he'll stab you and your partner 10 times. Like I've never seen somebody frisk somebody that slow. Could you please make it more awkward? Like it's just,
Remember the very first time I went through airport security after 9/11. And so everything was beefed up. Everything was much more crazy than normal. And they were starting to do the pat downs on everybody. Everyone was getting the pat down. And some woman took me aside and she starts looking at my nether regions and she's like, what do you got in there? I'm like, if you have to ask me that, this is probably not the job for you.
Hate to tell you. It was, I can probably share this one. This was shortly after 9/11. This was at the stage after 9/11 where they were doing the random checks as you were trying to get onto the concourse to get onto the aircraft. And so they would randomly pull people out of line and then go through your stuff again. And, they'd find your fingernail clippers and hold them up like they just found a bazooka in your bag kind of thing. And I was on a flight where several of us were flying. We were all armed. And I was the only non-federal agent in the group, and all knew each other. We were all traveling for the same reason, and we all had our paperwork in our hands and so forth to board. We'd cleared all the other checkpoints and so forth, and we're going to get on the airplane. And a young TSA agent comes up and tries to point to this gentleman in front of me who worked for a federal agency, I won't say which one, and instructs him that he needs to have him take off his jacket and search him. And this is where the world went into this weird slow motion mode where I could see him holding up his hand and motioning to the guy like Jedi mind trick. He was like, no, these four men are not the people you will be searching. Right. And the ticketing agent at the counter, right, just before you get onto the concourse, knows who we are because she's already checked our paperwork, right? And she unfortunately is in the middle of being having somebody explain something to her, shall we say, and she's trying not to be rude, but also trying to fix this before it becomes a really bad situation and they have to cancel the flight or rejigger how we're going, where we're going, right? And she finally just leaves the person speaking to her mid-sentence, and it's slow motion, and she's coming towards the TSA agent. She was like, no, and the kid keeps trying to grab at this particular agent, and I don't know where in the process the agent had unclipped his tiny little federal agent badge from his belt, and it was in the palm of his hand, and he nearly palm struck the TSA agent, so that the TSA agent basically saw his badge this close to his face, right? It was suddenly it was just whoosh in his face, and he was like, no, right? And the agent looked at it and blinked for a couple of seconds, was like, oh, very good, yeah, and tried to play it off. and then so the kid was really flustered, and he was a kid. He was I don't know, very, very young, and young adult, I should say. And I remember the agent looking at him and going, not me, and not the next three guys behind me. And I was immediately next to him, so I could hear everything that was going on. And we just kind of chuckled and continued onto the airplane. But, it's moments like that where, you look at things and you're like, well, was that a lack of training of that young man? Was it a lack of protocol and procedures so that, we've told everybody in their goat, coming up here, the pilots know, the flight attendants know, the person at the counter knows, right? Nobody clued in, like at that time, nobody had clued in the TSA agent, right? So you're just like, and my friend was a little bit flustered. He was a little bit annoyed by it. And I was kind of like, who do you blame? And is it really worth being upset about?
That, really?
Yeah. How are you going to fix it?
So one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is there's a pretty enormous amount of people who believe that you should try to disarm the population. And if I'm trying to look at the people who would actually go about doing that,
right?
We have whatever it is called 1,000 ATF agents, let's say. They're never going to be able to get enough flights around the country to get 300 to 400 million firearms away from people. So the only other option is local police. What do you feel like your brothers in arms would feel if they were given the order to go and extract the firearms from
civilians,
from every single one of their neighbors effectively? How would that actually play out, do you think?
I think the majority are very quickly going to, it's very interesting. So I think a lot of people misunderstand the concept of the thin blue line, right? And that, they would switch the side of the line that they were standing on, right? They'd still be protecting society, but now they'd be facing the other direction, right? It's an unconstitutional request. At the same rate, it's also an unrealistic request. So I've trained once with an amazing man named Paul Howe. And if you've ever read or watched Black Hawk Down, he was the Delta Force operator that's credited with the fact that we know the story of what happened. And he does a lot of tactical training here in Central Texas, primarily for law enforcement and so forth. And he was asked a very similar question years ago. I think Obama was going into office at the time. And so, of course, there were fears that something like this would come up. And the way that he answered it, I thought was very interesting. And that is whether you used local law enforcement or you somehow got around posse comitatus and you tried to get the military to do it. At the end of the day, we I should say, those people in law enforcement, those people in the military, those people that they would be asking to do this are quite literally living in your communities, right? The rest of you know where they live. You know where their families are. This is not a winning situation, right? This is why the Revolutionary War, didn't do very well. You're not going to see people disarming people when they're worried about their families. You're not going to see people disarming people when the majority of your law enforcement officers, especially in states like Texas and so forth, are actually very pro, any amendment, right? I'd say pro second, but the reality is you'll find by and large, most of them are all about civil rights. Right, and this is a civil right, right? So
constitutionalization, the all of the amendments, not just
all
of them.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's where they swore their oath to.
That is why they swore that oath. That oath is to uphold the Constitution, not uphold somebody saying go violate somebody's civil rights.
So what happens if Biden, let's say, has a constitutional amendment and says no more Second Amendment?
Well, I mean, if you
now
really,
it's legal.
If we literally played that out, the only way that would have happened was actually for the majority of the states, our representatives, and by and large, a majority of the population to vote that way. We can't get. How long did it take us to get Hawaii to become a state? I mean, how long do you think that's going to take to go through? It's not going to be a one generation kind of thing.
But let's say it happens.
Yeah. Let's say it happens, then that's the law of the land, right? If we made a constitutional amendment that changed the Constitution, I think we all then have to agree we have to abide by it.
You think so?
Yeah.
And then you think that would actually that would work? The police would suddenly switch sides and say,
I don't know. I think this is one of those hot topics that even if you change the constitutional amendment, I don't know, if I was playing devil's advocate, but to do it, I have to put my head into a world where that would have passed, right? Which means the majority of people are now thinking and wanting completely differently. So I think people are just handing them in at that point, kind of Australia style. But
so
if it happened today, like somehow in a bizarro way, the vote went through and the Russians didn't hack the voting machines, and this came out, then I could see it being a big problem.
If this podcast happened a week ago, I would have totally agreed with everything you just said. Okay. However, I am now more educated in this topic than I was a week ago.
Educate me, my friend.
So there was a ban that happened in April 2019 for bump stocks, if you remember.
Yes.
582 bump stocks were handed to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms.
Yes.
582. Out of 520,000.
Okay.
So clearly, I mean, maybe some people just threw it in the trash.
They fall off of boats, I hear a lot. They fall into the
lot
lake.
Of boats, boat accidents.
Boating accidents.
But that is a compliance rate of around 1%, fraction of 1%.
Fraction of 1%. Yes, sir.
Yeah. About a tenth of a percent.
Math is fun.
Yes. So another 98 were secured as evidence as well. So to be fair, it's closer to 600 and something.
I'm so glad we're getting that much closer to 1%.
So we're nowhere near even 1% compliance. Yeah. Okay. So New Jersey also had a ban on large magazines. I think over 10 rounds, I believe.
Okay. So standard capacity magazines, not good for them.
Right.
Yeah.
So the New Jersey State Police spokesman said that despite the 18-month jail time and $10,000 fine, they didn't get a single magazine turned in.
They drove over them all by accident in their driveways. They were all broken.
Now I can see maybe some people sold them.
Yeah.
Maybe they demolished them in their garage or whatever, made them inoperable. Maybe they modified them to be 10 rounds. I don't question
what they did.
I'm just saying, I think the compliance rate is, now we have 2 data points. If one of them were there, I'd say, okay, well, that's an interesting data point. But we have 2 data points where the general public had to comply with some demand and the compliance rate was substantially less than 1%.
Yeah, I mean, closer to 0.
Yeah. Effectively 0.
literally, mathematically speaking, closer to 0 than it was to 1.
Yes. If you round it, is literally 0.
Yeah.
0%. So I just don't think we're ever going to get people handing their guns over like Australia did. I just don't.
I mean, I have a lot of friends in Australia that have a lot of guns. So, it's I don't think they got the turn in that's been advertised. I'm sure it's good. Right.
Sure.
I have friends in Australia today that buy guns on a regular basis legally. Right. They have similar restrictions to them that we see where we see highly regulated controls on firearms. Like I don't know, this one can't have a box magazine, even though it's designed to have a box magazine. So it's mechanically engineered. The box magazine isn't a box magazine. Right. Most things are bolt action, right? But they're same calibers and so forth. So it wasn't like they banned them, completely. I'm not saying we should ever do anything similar. I'm just, pointing it out. And yes, I see that there's still, regardless, I mean, even if you got to the point that an amendment like that passed, let's say it passed, 51 to 49%. Right. There's still a lot. There's 400 million of us. Right. That's a rounding up. That's a lot of people.
Since there's not that many people in the United States. Yeah. So there's also some strange misunderstanding about guns. There's many misunderstandings about guns. And I can't tell if it's totally intentionally, poorly misunderstood, partially, or, this person just doesn't know what they're talking about, which,
sure.
It could have been, depending on the person, it could be one or more of those things, depending on the situation. Or they might know something about one thing, but not about another thing. One example of that was bump stocks versus force reset versus binary.
Yeah.
Like they all do the exact same thing effectively. I mean, they all make you shoot spray and pray. You can shoot a lot of rounds downrange.
You can shoot faster, I think is the best way to describe it.
You're probably not going to shoot well.
No.
But you're going to shoot fast.
Yeah.
And so why one of those things? Why choose bump stocks and not the other two? Or many other variants that could do something similar?
The best answer I can give you, because to me it also doesn't make sense, right? If I look at it logically, I look at it with my engineering brain, right? You're shooting faster, period, right? Why pick bump stocks? Well, Las Vegas, right? So we had an incident, wide publication.
Yeah, but
we demonized a thing.
But
and
he
now
could have
we keep
easily used one of those others.
He could have done any number of things, right? It's a weird thing. So I'll see people demonize a particular model of rifle, right? And you go, okay, well, that's interesting. Why? Well, because it's the most used. Well, no, it's not. But keep answering me why. Oh, because and then they have nothing. It's just the villainization of the object. And I hate equating gun homicides to driving, but I try and make a parallel between cars and firearms for people who don't understand firearms. And you look at them and you go, okay, the Ford F-150 is the number one most sold vehicle in the United States. Mathematically speaking, it therefore is involved in the most burglaries of motor vehicles, the most thefts of motor vehicles, and the most accidents of motor vehicles, and by extrapolation, the most deaths of people involved in motor accidents. Is it because the F-150 is less safe? Is it because people who have it drive poorly? Or is it just because of the fact that it is the most popular and therefore most sold vehicle? The most popular and most sold type of firearm quite often is, outside of pistols, when you get into rifles, is the AR-15 style platform. Why? It's a sporting rifle. We use it for everything. People buy it for self-defense, to hunting, to shooting sports, to just to have it, right? Villainizing it is a weird thing, right? Also,
and it comes in all sorts of configurations, including bolt action.
Bolt action, it comes in all kinds of configurations and
calibers
like
and so forth.
22. The thing that really gets me is you look at the people who want to villainize it and you go, why are you so angry? Well, it has a pistol grip, it has a this, it has a that, it has the other thing. These all make it more usable to kill or whatever they want to go with. And I'm like, they make it more ergonomic. Like, we started with sticks with a pole, right? They were very uncomfortable to hold. And eventually we learned, instead of holding your wrist, canted forward like this, if you hold your wrist like this, like every other thing that you hold with your wrist, from a Coke can to, whatever, versus twisting your hand like this, it's easy. That's why it's designed like that, right? It's all designed like any other modern design of anything, especially in sporting equipment, to make it more ergonomic, to make it easier to use, right? In some cases.
So that's, that points to sheer ignorance. Another example that I thought was bad in such an interesting way that I thought was worth mentioning. Representative David, I'm going to butcher his name, Cicilline, I think is Cicilline. I think can't exactly remember. Democrat, Rhode Island. And I apologize to this man, I just cannot pronounce his name. Claimed that a stabilizing brace turns an AR pistol into an automatic weapon.
Ah, yes. I saw him.
So, I don't know if his staffers are just completely not understanding what's going on, or I don't know if that was a purposeful thing to scare people. I can't tell.
I can't tell, because if you actually understand what that brace is, when somebody asks me how they work, I will often look at them and go, have you ever seen somebody using crutches where the single-handed crutch straps around their forearm? Yes. I go, that's exactly how that works. I don't know how that turns into anything other than it braced it to my forearm so that it was more stable. Just like the crutch was braced to my forearm to make it more. It's stabilizing brace. It's a stabilizing brace. That's literally what it does. It has no purpose in this world other than the fact it allowed me to strap the pistol to a portion of my arm, therefore more stable than my hand, which mechanically speaking, is not a very stable platform.
So if you had a guess, do you think that these representatives are just not doing their homework, or do you think that they're trying to scare the populace?
I would like, in my heart of hearts, to believe it is because they're not doing their homework and they're ignorant of the topic and they're just trying to take a position. Sadly, that still means that they are choosing ignorance over knowledge. And I would pray that it's not because they are purposely trying to mislead the masses who are not going to do the research.
Got it. So, Saskatchewan just had a mass knifing.
Yes.
It was 10 injured, 15 dead last reported that I saw.
Another one passed away today.
Okay, maybe it's 16, so apologize. In May of 2010, 48 in China were murdered in a single mass stabbing. I think that was actually using a cleaver. So
London Bridge.
I was going to say that the problem seems to me that this is, yes, it is possible to do more damage with a pistol or rifle or whatever on the average.
Yeah.
But that will never stop somebody who's really hell-bent on hurting people.
Right.
And now we see, the UK, for instance, is banning knives. Like how
banning ever smaller knives. They've been working on it for years.
Ban any sort of pointiness on a knife. Like
yes.
They had a whole big thing with professional chefs who came out and said that you never need the point on a knife. It is not actually useful for being a chef. No, I'm serious. This actually happened. I don't really think that people are thinking this one through.
Yeah.
I mean, like Sweden has grenades. Are they going to start banning grenades in Sweden? Or that's just a joke. But,
it's like moving to Sweden. No, I'm kidding. I literally have no use for a grenade.
Yet, until you have one, and then you're like, oh, wait, this is so practical.
I don't have a grenade yet.
No, but I mean, I really think that there's this mass misunderstanding of how there is no utopia on the other end of this. Like you can't ban your way to a utopia.
Well, you can't because you keep trying to ban the tool. And I think what most people do is they mistake the fact that we can categorize knife, gun, bat, so forth under the category of weapon, right? But in reality, the weapon wasn't the tool they used. The weapon was the human being, right? We're apex predators. We are the apex of apex predators, and we're apex predators because we have opposable thumbs and brains, and we can turn everything, including this mug that says the RSnake show, into a weapon and kill somebody with it. And we can force multiply. I
designed it to do that.
I know you did. And we can force multiply our lethality through tools, right? But at the end of the day, we are the weapon. And psychology and history shows us no matter what we do in society, which let's just face it, society is a set of rules that we all mentally agree to abide by. There will always be the divergent, right? And we have names for all the different types of divergencies, and we have also people that just snap, right? So we have everything from, just people who don't follow rules to that's it, I've had it, right? And then you have just people that are, again, still apex predators and just bad people, and they're going to hurt others. Does it help us to disarm the rest of society from tools, or should we be looking at society and how we handle society, how we indoctrinate people into our society, how we do things so that they don't do these things? Or do we really look at the psychology of this and go, mathematically speaking, there will always be some percentage of us that are going to hurt others?
There was some crazy stat I saw that was multi-100,000 crimes stopped per year using guns. Now, I'm not exactly sure if that stat included police officers or not, but
it does.
But either way, in your experience, out on calls or whatever, how often has the bad guy been stopped by some just citizen who just said, hey, stop doing what you're doing with a gun?
Oh, a lot. Yeah. Family violence, they know each other. Regular robberies, muggings, carjackings, all kinds of things where we get there and the suspect may have fled or the suspect may have been subdued by the individuals one way or another, but good people came out on top because they were armed. It's the same reason, I carried a gun, right? It was there. I needed it as a tool, and I definitely have a number of times where I used it to stop someone, not like a Hollywood TV show or like every other week I was like, under investigation for why I discharged it. I can say I've never discharged one, on duty. But the threat of using one, the fact that it was there saved lives, right? Many times, sometimes my own, many times somebody else's, right? That was the moment when somebody decided to stop beating the woman that was nearly unconscious in front of them, right?
Of course. So I would be remiss if I didn't ask, what's the current thinking amongst the police community about Uvalde and what happened there? Is that sort of like if I were there, it would have been different, or is that was a failure of some policy and
again, it's a moment like we discussed earlier, where it is hard for anybody who's trained to do that, anybody who is doing that job for the reason of helping other people, to even contemplate why you would be standing in a hallway, why you wouldn't move. I can tell you, the department I was with forever, much like many departments, ironically, in Texas, after a prior shooting in a school, changed their policies on when to make entry for an active shooter situation. So the old policies were you waited until you had a substantial force, and then you went in. And that changed to the first officer on scene goes in. You don't wait. And in Texas, by and large, unless you're in a really big city, officers travel single, alone, right? So you don't have a partner in your car. Your partner is in another patrol car, probably on another part of the city. And you go in and you train so that, you can acknowledge and show them, I've gone down this hallway, or I'm down this one. So when they catch up to you, hopefully there's not a problem.
Sure.
Right. Because it's a high stress situation.
So they come in 5 minutes late.
They catch up to you, or they continue down a different hallway, or everybody's trying to, God forbid, home in on the sound of gunshots or people screaming or whatever, because you're also there to help people. You're not just there to flush out and go hunting, if you will, for the bad guy.
Right.
But I would have been perfectly okay if you saw that situation and an officer went into a room where a bunch of people were hiding and put himself between the door and them to say, I'm going to safeguard this location.
Sure.
The other officers can handle everything else, right? That I would have been, absolutely, right? I think we saw the reality of it, right? Where we saw, a off-duty Border Patrol agent, like getting his hair cut, right? And gets a text message from his wife, who's his teacher at the school. And if I'm reciting the story correctly, the barber literally lent him the shotgun from the barbershop, right? And he showed up and went in, and they told him he couldn't. He was like, "Fuck you, then stop me, right?
Shoot me,
shoot me." And he wound up ending the whole situation. By and large, I will say the officers that I've worked with, the ones that I've trained with, that is, what should have happened, right? It's, that is why you take up that job, right? A firefighter doesn't take up firefighting because they're going to watch a building get to a point where it's safe to put the fire out, right? So,
yeah, I hate to phrase it like this, but these are very useful and instructive examples of there are ways that we learn. And I think this is a very useful thing for police, not just here, but everywhere. Like you can't just hang out. I mean, not just the loss of lives, but the reputational damage that did to the police force on top of it. That's wasn't great, I don't think. So you think that's just a matter of bad policy? The policy has now been fixed. Is that?
At that point, I'm just armchair quarterbacking.
Sure, yeah, of course.
There's so much that
and was that a
bits
city?
and pieces.
Was that a city?
Yeah, it's
ordinance?
a city. Well, it's a city police department, so they have their own policies and procedures, just like any other department would.
So it's not a statewide. Here's how to handle the situation.
No. I can say by and large, every I wouldn't even call it a guideline. Every department that I know of that I've worked with has followed more the mentality of, again, if you're the first officer on scene, you go in, period. And you do what you're supposed to be doing, right? Does that mean you thoughtlessly throw your life away? No, please be tactical and strategic about what you're doing. And if you do, realize there's, I don't know, you show up and you hear the gunfire, right? And you can tell it's more than one weapon. Well, maybe it's not so smart to go in by yourself, right? Maybe you do hold back, or you secure a certain section, right? But you're not going to go any further until another person shows up, because you're like, there's at least two shooters, right? I'm already outgunned, right? If I go in, then if I fall and nobody else is here, they take the rest of the school. That's just tactics and strategic stuff.
Yeah, of course.
So I don't want to attack.
And also it's a three-dimensional problem too. They could be above you or below you or wherever. So.
Yeah. These schools aren't, by and large, they're not just like, one hallway with like 4 classrooms off of it, right? They're sprawling everywhere. It's, I did again, in training with Paul Howe, I was taking an advanced hostage rescue class that he was teaching. And ironically, this was during the Virginia State,
Tech?
Virginia Tech shooting happened. I think literally the mornings of one of our classes, and we were practicing on a old school that was going to be demolished in this particular town that we had gotten permission to use, which was good because we were practicing breaching techniques and making doorways that didn't exist and stuff like that to get in faster. Going through walls, literally. And I have to say, even that simple of a school, right, with its intersecting hallways and stuff, you don't think about what that's like until you're practicing clearing a place like that. And there's actors that are, in our case, we're doing everything from, they had firearms and hostages to improvised explosives. He was throwing all the bells and whistles at us by the end of this particular course.
Sure.
And you're shooting simunition, so it hurts, and so on and so forth in what you're doing. And, you suddenly realize how many weird intersecting hallways there are and how many people you have to tie up to look down all the different lanes that fire could come in so that your team can go search the next room. Mm-hmm. Right. And then you go into the room and then it's a school. So suddenly like that room has 4 rooms, 3 giant closets, like you're just like
tons of hiding
places.
places.
Like we did not bring enough people, but you learn to clear and you learn to do that with shorthandedness because, when you look at a lot of these Texas towns and so forth and our quote unquote cities, right, that aren't like Houston and Dallas and so forth. And you're like, oh, there's 20 police officers, there's 30 police officers, and there's X thousands of people that live here.
Sure. Gotcha. So I wanted to change a little bit about police corruption.
Okay.
It's a fun topic. So one of the things, just as a standard boring old citizen, just traveling around my copious places I've been in my life, one thing I see often is police officers driving absolutely insane.
Okay.
And they're clearly not going anywhere specific. They're just weaving through traffic.
I want to agree on the insane, but I understand the image.
And very rarely do they have lights blaring or a siren going. So and they're not pulling anybody over and they're clearly not going anywhere specific because they kind of like change lanes kind of randomly. And
I guess that's the perception.
Well, it happens often, I would say, in my experience. Yeah. And occasionally you'll see them flip on their lights and they're going somewhere, but very often they're just not. They're just they don't turn on their lights. You don't see them. They're slowing up and they're going fast and they're slowing up and they never turn on their lights and they're kind of driving insane. And so
I love that's your perception. That's great.
Yeah.
I've been that person. Yeah.
I mean, I think
there's an actual method to that madness, but I'll wait.
Okay.
Till you finish.
I would love to hear it. But I've seen, changing lanes, for instance, without using their signals, and all the things that we are all told as citizens
you have to do. Which you should be doing.
You should be doing. Yeah. Well, I mean, purely from a safety perspective.
I'm that guy that literally signals in the parking lot that I'm about to turn. Like, my friends make so much fun of me when they drive with me because I'm always using the turn signal. Yeah.
So, but these, although very minor, are examples that could be perceived as corruption. Right? Like, well, you're arresting people, or at minimum,
you wrote that guy a ticket for the thing I saw you do 5 minutes later.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And to me, it seemed like there could be some sort of technical controls, like anytime you're going over a certain speed limit or whatever, just automatically like have some sergeant somewhere go, hey, why were you speeding in this zone? Like, this is a school zone. You probably shouldn't be going 80.
I like the fact that you don't think that technology exists.
Oh, well,
yeah, it does.
I mean, but what I don't see is a lot of, investigations being opened about someone's driving behavior. I mean, maybe it happens. I just don't ever see it. But
yeah. I mean, I guess we could start way at the top.
Okay.
And in the transportation code, at least for Texas, I can't speak for other states because I haven't really studied them. The state's big enough. I only needed this one. Marked police units, specifically marked police units, are actually exempt from the entire transportation code. They can drive them backwards if you want to. You can park them anywhere you want. You don't have to have the lights on, right? So, I mean, if we started there, that's number one, they're not breaking a law because by the definition of fact, it doesn't apply to them.
I say, okay. All right.
The understanding and the reason that law exists or that exemption exists in the law is because of the reality of operating an emergency vehicle. And until you've driven one or driven in one with somebody that's trying to go to a call.
Let's go steal one right now. Let's go do it.
Okay. Give it a little while. If I take another commission, I'll have you come for a ride along. When you turn on the party lights or the go fast lights or whatever joke, somebody gives them as a nickname, the emergency lights on top of your vehicle. Even as a civilian, if you're in traffic, watch what happens with the other drivers when that happens. Don't focus on the police officer. This is what everybody focuses on. You always focus on the police car, right? What the hell? Why is he just weaving in between everybody? Focus on the other drivers for a minute. We all know what we're supposed to do. We're all supposed to pull to the right and stop in both directions, creating a huge lane that the emergency vehicles can go through. That is the intent of that. We want them to get where they're going because they're probably going to help someone, right?
Yep.
Ambulances, everything right up there, especially an ambulance. They probably have somebody in there that it's time critical where they're going. Get out of their way. Right.
Well, all
exactly.
Of them, really.
All of them. Unfortunately, when you turn those lights on, everybody does something differently. People will stop in front of you, look in their mirror, and then point like go around. Happens all the time. They don't know what to do. They're starting to do this. Okay, then you're like, fine, I'll go around you. Nope, then they move this way. Then you're doing that. It's actually easier to move through traffic when you have to get somewhere in a hurry, when the traffic is somewhat heavy, not turning them on. Because as soon as you do, the randomness of what everybody does when they finally notice them is absolutely that. You love when you see the people that pull to the right and stop. I'm even happy if you just stop in the lane. At least you're no longer a moving variable, right? I can get around that. I can figure that out. I'm not saying anybody should ever do that.
Just lock it up.
I've had people just, and you're like, no, you're like, oh. That's why so many police officers die of heart attacks. It's this kind of stuff and stress. That's one of the main reasons. If you ask a police officer, like, why did you just weave through traffic? Was because, if I turned my lights on, and it's documented, I've caused accidents by turning my lights on because somebody was like, and right into the car next to him. You're like, thank you for pulling to the right and stopping, but check if there's a car there already, right? Like, that's not permission for you just to yank your wheel to the right and go straight over the top of the lady in their Prius. Like, that's not, going to work very well.
Unless you're in a Hummer.
Yeah, well, yeah. Then I just drive over Priuses. So
the joke there is he owns a Hummer.
Yes. The driving gets more intense when you turn it on. It's useful when you're coming to intersections. It's useful and that's why you see them flick it on and they hit their sirens all of a sudden. You hear them beatbox with all the different sounds that hopefully people pay attention over their headphones and stereos and things they're not supposed to be doing when they drive, talking on the phone. And then you'll even see them turn them off after they leave the intersection and they keep weaving through traffic up ahead. Well, they haven't stopped going to the call. They're just trying not to create chaos in all the randomness of what people do, because unfortunately they can't remember, just pull to the right and stop.
Interesting.
And if you listen to the audio recordings in a lot of the police cars, because as soon as you hit the lights on, it's recording all the microphones, everything get recorded inside the vehicle. All the cameras, the one that faces the back in case you had a prisoner, the front ones, all the cameras are getting recorded. My department that I worked for, the cars are recorded 24/7, right? And that's a lot of departments run that way too, especially with digital. You pull up to the police department, it just starts uploading it over the Wi-Fi. But if you listen to those videos, you'll hear them on the inside. It means pull to the right and stop. It's just pull to the right and stop. Why is this hard? Why are you trying to kill me? I'm just trying to go help an old lady. Like something, she fell and she's hurt. Like, get out of my way. And the reality is, everybody's always like, well, what's so important to get, to the crime? And it's not like a Hollywood movie. You're not showing up and there's always somebody and he's holding up the liquor store. Like that's almost never.
Sure.
Like he's held up the liquor store and left, right? Is usually that. But one of the realities I guess people don't realize about law enforcement is almost without question, they are the first of the first responders even to medical 911 calls, right? So
that's why we carry Narcan.
That's why we carry Narcan. That's why most police officers, or a lot of police officers in Texas, are actually EMTs. We actually show up with everything from defibrillators to, well, not defibrillators, a lot of medical equipment with us.
Not defibrillators.
Not a defibrillator, but a
I thought they had the one that was
yes, but that's not called a defibrillator. For the life of me, I cannot remember the acronym right now. Even though I'm certified to use it, I swear. It's not really hard. You push the button and it starts telling you in English what to do next.
And
then
by the way, Chris, if I die of a heart attack, do not give him that machine.
It just walks you through. But police officers would be the first ones to get there, right? Number one, because they're already out patrolling, right? And the paramedics and the firefighters are at a station, so they have to go from a fixed point to you. Police are all over, and the closest one to you already physically moving is the one getting dispatched to you, right? And also, as we see, again, society getting pretty dark, more and more often, in especially bigger cities, we're seeing that if an officer isn't on scene, a lot of times paramedics and EMS won't go in, right? And we're talking about places where the firefighters and the paramedics get mugged, shot. They steal the drugs and stuff out of the ambulance while they're inside, taking care of a patient, right? And so forth. And you're like, well, thanks. I hope they don't have to go to another call, and I hope that person coming out of the building didn't need anything inside of that vehicle. So more and more often, you're expecting them to be at places like that too. But by and large, if you see them driving erratically, it's that, or it could just be that there's a bumblebee inside the car.
So, but what I noticed randomly, I noticed this: police officers during COVID. Partly, I'm sure, due to George Floyd, stopped pulling people over for speeding. Just stopped.
Wasn't because of George Floyd.
Okay.
Are you talking about specifically in this area of Texas?
Yes.
That was due to the Travis County Sheriff.
Okay.
They didn't want people being brought into jail, and they didn't want a lot of interactions with the police and the public over things like that. So it's twofold. Number one, they didn't want to keep populating the jail because of COVID. Right, they had no controls, and this was early on. Nobody like boogeyman, right? You can catch it by blinking at somebody, right? And then also, they didn't want the close interaction unless it was super necessary, because they didn't want the officers coming down with COVID. We didn't have vaccines and so forth at the time. So the orders were, unless you absolutely have to. Yeah.
Interesting. So I call that selective prosecution. If it's not illegal, then why is it illegal sometimes? You know what I mean?
Well, do you remember I don't have to arrest you?
I know you don't. So that
pulling you over is arresting you.
It is, and so a number of my friends did get pulled over, but they got you get to drive yourself home treatment. You know what I mean? So, by the way, any other police officers who are listening, I also would like to drive home that night, but I think these are the kinds of things people see and have massive question marks. Like, how are some people just, batting their eyes and getting away with whatever, and other people aren't?
Yeah.
And that is a very hard question to answer. I mean, I think you've done a great job of doing it.
I think is it Chris Rock? There's a comedian that is like, he asked a police friend of his how not to get a ticket. And he was like, if you can make me laugh, I probably won't write you a ticket. And that's an actual reality, because I think what a lot of people keep forgetting is that's another human being.
Of course.
Right. And if you interact with them as you would another human being that you're hoping to get along with, that is going to go a lot further than not. And that's on both sides of that. That's human nature. You can say, oh, the police officer should be more professional. Well, yeah, but there's a certain point where professionalism and my humanity intersect, right?
It's true of every profession.
Yeah. If I walk up and, you're like, oh man, I'm so sorry. You make some kind of joke, something. I've walked up to cars. It's happened more than once. And they're playing quite loudly the theme song to Cops. So I'm walking up and Bad Boys is playing, and they're all like sitting in the car like,
Did it work?
Oh, it works. You laugh and because you also recognize that's another human being. So both sides.
Sure.
The police officer who's like, the adrenaline's pumping, all the other stuff. I had to chase you, this, that, and the other thing. Hopefully I didn't chase you too far, whatever. Remembers you're a human, right? You remember that they're a human. You interact as people just trying to do good things, right?
And there's a certain amount of humanity just in driving. Like, sorry. I lead-footed it for a minute.
Sorry, I was looking down at my phone and I moved into your lane.
Well, not
that never happens. Trust me, if I've ever done something similar, you will see me look at the person like, I'm so sorry. So sorry, I'm an idiot. Should write myself a ticket right now. That by and large, it comes down to the interaction that takes place.
So in New York City, there was 22 or 24 officers that were brought up in disciplinary action. I think it was a number much, much larger than that, like 60, 70 people total that were involved in a series of misdemeanors or whatever that they wanted to, effectively the police department wanted to fire them for whatever reason.
Okay.
And they got brought before a council, the adverse action panel, that basically allowed them to get rid of effectively all but 3, I think, were turned away. So out of the original 60, 70 people, only 3 they were allowed to actually terminate. And this is the police wanted.
I thought it was the other way. Okay, that's okay. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. So they were able to get rid of
3
out of
60 or 70.
So again, we're down to like single digits. The math never is good.
Under 10% by a lot. So it's those types of stories, and it's that type of interaction that I was just describing earlier, that now there could be all kinds of really good reasons why that ended up happening. And I'm not actually trying to admonish police officers when I'm doing this, but I think there is a public perception problem that, you can individually, you can talk to any police officer and look in the eye and they're trying to do the right thing. They really are.
Yeah.
There might be a little bit of corruption, just like there is corruption period in any profession, but also maybe not. And maybe it's much higher. And wouldn't it be terrifying if the people who are supposed to be serving and protecting are the actual criminals that we're all worried about?
Yeah. I think part of that is also the very needed perception that if these are the people that are supposed to be upholding our laws, right? I think altruistically, you want to look at them, they should be irreproachable, right?
Should be, ideally.
Should be, ideally.
Yeah.
But I think that
a Ken doll,
like a Ken,
no personality.
Exactly. Yeah.
Just almost a robot.
But we don't want that person as a police officer. We want the human being as a police officer, right? We want the person who can make decisions, the person that can sit there in an investigation or just a general conversation after speeding ticket to a kid stole candy from a store, something, right? I'm using purposely a benign thing like that. Use their humanity and understand the difference between the letter of the law and the spirit of the law, right? Would it do better for me today to take that kid in and have his parents show up at the police department and, probably going to get, spanked and beat up when he gets home because of the embarrassment? Or can I take that moment in time to talk to him? I'm going to give the shop owner the $3 for the candy. The kid learns a lesson. He also gets to learn that police officers are human beings, so on and so forth. And that was the better move for society.
Sure.
Right. And I think there is where you see certain things. And I don't know what they were under investigation for.
It's kind of irrelevant for this conversation, but yeah, I think what my major concern is we need the public to have trust in police officers, because if they don't, you get these crazy things like defunding the police, which I think is patently crazy. I think that's a very dangerous design. There is possibly a better police force out there, and we could talk about that.
Sure.
But if you're talking about wholesale just dumping them on the floor and going with social workers, I don't think that's going to work. So Biden had an executive order to increase the scrutiny on police officers coming out of, George Floyd and other incidents. One of the things was better accountability in a universal database that all the different police officers can look into or see or whatever when they're recruiting. Okay. So if someone goes across state lines or whatever,
sure,
you're like, oh, what happened that they left this other department? Well, it turns out that all these things happen. Then maybe you should not hire this person because there's some misbehavior or whatever. A use of force data collection, which of course I think everyone's always curious about, like how many police officers are involved in deadly shootings or use of tasers or lethal chokeholds.
It's the one that baffles me because I have to fill out so many forms if I so much as like slap somebody that, and they're all federal forms and state forms. I'm like, well, where's all that data going? Like, well, so every department has to do it. I just don't understand where the data is.
Up till now, probably in a federal locker somewhere and never used.
Yeah.
But now it's supposed to go to a centralized database, which so maybe these are good ideas.
Little known fact, if I have to shoot a deer, like it got hit by a car on the side of the road, I have to fill out all the same use of force that I would had I used force on a human being. Files it the same way, with the exception of if I shot the deer, I have to file one extra form. I have to file a form with Texas Parks and Wildlife that says I killed a deer.
Right. Yeah. So one of the things, though, that was in there that sounded to me a little bit insane was the banning of chokeholds and carotid restraints.
Okay.
So they said the heads of federal LEAs shall, as soon as practical, but no later than 90 days from the date of this order, ensure that the respective agencies issue policies with requirements that are equivalent to or exceed the requirements of the policy issued by DOJ in 2021, which generally prohibits the use of chokeholds and carotid restraints, except where the use of deadly force is authorized by law. The head of every federal LEA law enforcement agency shall incorporate training consistent with this action.
Yeah.
So why might it be a bad idea that you can't choke somebody out?
A lot of reasons. It works. It has it's dangerous, right? Anybody that practices martial arts will tell you that it's also dangerous even in martial arts when it is allowed. Right. That's restricted to people over certain, certification levels or belts, right? Like brown belt and above usually and so forth. But there's a lot of factors to it, right? I could break off plaque, in your arteries, in your neck, and goes into your brain and causes an aneurysm, right? I inadvertently caused your death. Now, you would have died anyway from it, but today I caused the plaque to break off.
Sure.
I could notice that you've already passed out and go too far, right?
Or crush the larynx.
Or crush a larynx. And, there's other aspects to it. You can teach people to do it just like you do in any other martial art if you made it something you taught. Is it a tool that is usable in the tool chest? Absolutely it is, right? Should there be very rare restrictions on when you can do it? Probably, right? Just like, and I agree with part of the phrasing of that, when say lethal force would have been, allowed. I might extend it to other non-lethal implements have been deployed and it still has not stopped the subject, right? If somebody's on enough, drugs and so forth, you can hit them with all kinds of things and it's not doing it, but you cut off blood to the brain and they're going sleepy, and that's going to keep you from the other aspects where you see them hitting them repeatedly. That causes a lot of harm as well.
Of course.
Yeah.
The part I kind of liked was that, someone had to feel like their life was in danger.
Mm-hmm.
But just because your life isn't in danger doesn't mean someone else's life isn't in danger.
Yeah. Well, I read it a little bit differently. So use of force and use of lethal force is allowed for not just when I feel my life is in danger. Your life may be in danger, and the only way I can save you as the innocent party is to use lethal force against the other person. Yeah. So I would read it more. I can still use it to help save somebody else, not just myself.
So if somebody is on some serious drugs and erratic, and has shown some propensity to, throw things or hit walls or whatever, where it's not really clear who's in danger or not. It's sort of in this fringe, like they might just be damaging their own hand, but everyone else is safe because they think they're aliens and they wouldn't dare punch aliens or whatever crazy thing.
I've been on that call.
Yeah. Exactly. At the same time, you need to remove this person from general public. I mean, clearly they're not stable. At least until they sober up, right?
I mean, and I want to stop them from hurting themselves more.
Yeah, sure.
Potentially killing themselves, maiming themselves.
Exactly. That seems like a place where use of force actually makes a ton of sense because they're not going to just willingly walk over to your police car and get in.
Yeah.
They probably think you're an alien, you know what I mean? Or whatever crazy thing's going on in their head.
Yeah.
So you're going to have to do something to coax them in there. And if it's not something just as simple as, hey, let's go talk over here and let's get in the car, or, if you can't de-escalate it. And
and those things are actually really well connected, right? So individuals who are on methamphetamine quite often are hallucinating, right? And they are in a complete hallucinogenic state. I mean, I've had everything from the aliens are monitoring them to who are you guys, and don't recognize that you're in police uniforms and like nothing. They're like we don't look like we look like to them, right? They don't know what they're doing to themselves. Some voice in their head told them it was a great idea. They needed to start cutting off their fingers so that they couldn't get caught by the whatevers, right? So we have an expression that. When you go on calls like that, most of the people that you meet, you're meeting them on the worst day of their life, right? Whether that's because of the level of intoxication that they're at, or, somebody they loved is dead, right? Or anything in between those two things, right? There's that compassion. And then, yes, there is the need. Sometimes I want to help this person. I'm not judging them. This is, I'm hoping, is the worst day of their life. This is the worst time that they've ever had doing something like this. And that if we can save their life and get them help, then hopefully they're never doing this again.
So what's the alternative? I mean, we have chokehold restraints, arm bars, leg bars, etc. We have tasers. You have batons.
Yes.
You have your fists. You can actually punch and kick or whatever.
But all of these things can have the same side effects.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what seems a little strange to me. In fact, some of them are quite a bit more likely to cause damage than others. If you have to pull out your baton and start going to town on somebody with a baton, that's going to be a lot worse than just choking them out, statistically speaking. Also, weirdly enough, people take the baton more seriously than other weapons. I remember this had to have been 10 years ago in my law enforcement career. I pulled over what was a drunk driver, and I pulled him over for suspicion of the fact that they were drunk.
And they
driving on the side of the sidewalk.
They were driving half on a sidewalk at the time. Ironically enough, they were also weaving.
You were just profiling every.
They were weaving between all 4 lanes in both directions. You know, they were going like 2 miles an hour for most of it. They finally pulled over, and doesn't quite pull over where I ever want them to. Right?
Sure.
They pulled into their parking space in their apartment complex. Is consequently what they did, and it was such a tight area, I couldn't really get the police car where I wanted it. And I got out, and the police officer's worst situation is you can't see the person's hands, right? And I don't know where this guy got his pants made, but his pockets were so deep. To me, it was like his arms were in there all the way to his elbows, like inside of his pockets. And I keep ordering him to stop and show me his hands. And it's a South American individual, based off of what he physically looked like. So when he wasn't responding in English, I switched to giving him commands in Spanish, and he kept coming towards me, and he slowly kept taking his hands out of his pockets, but not out of his pockets. And he had reached a distance to me where I now felt, you know, I should already have my pistol out because he's now closing too close, right? So I drew my pistol and kept ordering him to stop and show me his hands. And he took another step or two towards me, and I'm still keeping my calm, but, you know, you're starting to think through and everything that's going to happen. And finally he jerks his hands out of his pockets. And all the training, you know, helped me. Yeah. And his hands were now empty, and they were up. But he kept coming towards me. And I realized at that moment I had 2 problems. Number one, he's closing distance. I can't actually back up because of this weird situation of how he parked and so forth. I would have tripped over my own car. And because I'd already retreated a little bit. And I knew I had to switch to something else on the force continuum. It was also quite windy, so I knew I wasn't going to use pepper spray because then everybody gets it. And my partner was still minutes away. I could hear him in the radio, and I could hear the siren far away, right? And so I don't even know how I did it to this day. It was like ninja-like moves. I holstered my pistol, and in almost the same continuing motion drew my AS baton, so the big metal baton that police officers carry, and it expands as you swing it up, right? And he stopped, and his eyes got the size of like saucers, right? And then he just fell straight down to the ground and stuck his hands out at the sides with his palms up, and I was like, the hell? So I walked over and handcuffed him at this point, right? Because I was still by myself, and I was like, okay, well, I can at least make sure none of us are getting hurt because he has been very non-compliant, and I also don't want to just leave him laying on his face on the concrete. So let me put some handcuffs on him and stood him up and frisked him to make sure there were no weapons, and then just left him leaning against the car. And my partner finally shows up, and you know, my Spanish outside of commands and so forth generally sounds like really loud, slow English. So much better with German. So my partner shows up, and we're talking to the guy, and he definitely doesn't speak English. Definitely does speak Spanish. And I asked my partner to ask him to explain why he wouldn't stop when he saw the gun, but he did stop, and he fell down to the ground and basically surrendered for all intent and purposes when he saw the baton. And he answers my partner. My partner starts laughing for like a good minute or two. And I look at him and I'm like, what? He goes, well, he said what he knows about American police and what he's seen since he's been in America is that American police aren't corrupt, and they won't shoot you unless you are actually threatening them. But he was sure as hell that you were going to hit him with that big metal stick if he didn't stop coming towards you. And he was like, and I agreed that he should hit me with the metal stick, so I laid down on the ground. So he actually was continuing to get closer to me because he knew I wouldn't shoot him. And he was actually going to try and fight with me.
Wow.
But when he saw the stick come out, the stick as he called it, he knew I would absolutely use that.
Sure.
So there's your force continuum.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's very scary.
Mm-hmm.
So one other thing that happened that made quite a bit of news was in Chicago. In 2021, there was a Safety Act that was put out. And in large part, it was sort of similar to Biden's, where there's just better reporting and better training, et cetera, which maybe is mostly good. But one of the things that got a lot of contention, good or bad, was no cash bails anymore. So effectively, you're just let out, or you stay in jail if you're the person who needs to stay in jail for whatever reason that is.
Okay. I don't know how they determine that.
I think it's a
certain threshold on charges.
Yeah,
okay.
I think that's how it is set up. I didn't quite read all of that, but what do you think about the idea of, I mean, there is certainly a cohort of people who are very poor, very, very poor.
Yes.
And if they have to pay $50, $100 to a bail bondsman to get, maybe the total bail is small. Maybe it's $500 or whatever.
That would be an extremely small bail.
Yeah. But let's just say it's small, but you still have to pay your bail bondsman, and
right.
There's some amount that's coming out of your checking account, even in the best scenario. And they just, that's the difference between them eating and not eating sort of situation. It obviously doesn't make a lot of sense just to put them back on the street if they are real criminals. But if it's, you forgot to show up to court or something. Right. Do you really want them in jail for that? I mean, I don't know. Maybe. Are you going to put them back on the street as soon as you arrest them because they?
I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole on that one.
I mean,
that literally is the person I want to see stay in jail, because they've already shown that they can't meet their promise to show up.
Yeah, but it's not necessarily,
which is the whole thing of letting them out.
I know this is a weird scenario, but to me, it sort of points out how kind of obscure and weird this is. So you've decided this person needs to go to jail for whatever, or show up to court anyway.
Yeah.
They have failed to do that. And so you have a warrant to go get them, and then you release them again, like immediately afterwards.
Usually,
I realize
I don't want to. I hear what you're trying to do, but I don't want to go down like attacking that, because the reality is, if a judge issues a habeas, which is that type of warrant, bring him before me, right? Because you didn't show up before him. I bring you to jail, and you see a judge then and there. Right.
Got it.
So that's a different scenario.
Okay.
That's literally that's the one of two times I have to arrest somebody. A judge said, go get him.
Got it.
Right. Or if I encounter you and I run you and the system comes back and it's a habeas warrant for your arrest, I have to arrest you. That's the same thing.
Makes sense.
Right.
So what about like just shoplifting or something like that, where someone has committed some
They committed the crime. We've gone in, they've been magistrated. If we're following, the process is followed. It's your civil rights. Like, so you get arrested, right? You get processed through, you're brought to, in Texas, you're brought to a jail, an actual jail run by the sheriff. There you are magistrated if you haven't already been magistrated prior to, which can happen sometimes. You enter a plea, and then a bond is set, right? And you can pay the bond and leave, right? And then come back, right? Or you can sit out your time until you can go before a judge for the hearing on the crime.
So in this case, that's
where we align on, if you're setting the bonds on crimes or any crime, doesn't even matter at that point, where somebody who is impoverished now has to lose their job because they're not going to work. They're in jail, right? They're going to not be able to eat, not make their mortgage payment, not make their rent, whatever, right? Because they have to post real numbers. Let's talk about them, right? They get a $10,000, surety bond against them. They have to at least put 1,000 of that down, right? It's 10%. So, the bondsman will cover the rest if they were able to get a bail bondsman. Otherwise, they have to puke $10,000 from somewhere.
Right.
Right. The average person doesn't have 10,000. It's not even just, let's not just not talk about impoverished. Let's just talk about the average family, right?
Yeah, of course.
Can the average person sit there and go, oh, right, I'm going to take $5,000 out of our bank account and leave it in probate with the court on my promise to come back, and then I get my money back, and then we have a hearing. But in the meantime, I can go about my regular life.
Sure.
Right? That's where I always have had a problem with it, right? Because you in a lot of cases, you still they're still humans. You're still human, right? Whatever they did, right? Very rarely did I have somebody in the back of a police car that wasn't remorseful for what they did, whether I believed them or not, or how good the waterworks were with them, right? It could vary. But by and large, right, it's a first-time offender, it's, something like that. And it's starting to dawn on them, like all those pieces of the puzzle are falling in place for them, right? They're realizing, shit, I gotta be at work tomorrow. I'm not going to be at work tomorrow. They're not going to like the reason I'm not at work tomorrow. I could very well lose my job, right? Oh, I'm not only not going to be at work tomorrow, I'm not going to be at work for like several weeks. I'm going to be living in here eating bologna sandwiches, right? I have all these other things I'm supposed to be doing in my life. My family depends on me. My spouse depends on me. My children depend on me. And all those pieces start falling into place. And usually that's why you're seeing adults start to cry, because they're starting to realize the consequences of what they just did. It's not, I'm going to jail. It's not it's literally the very short-term pieces like this. And it is the whole, oh my God, I have to come up with a whole bunch of money, right, wrong, or indifferent, right? There's enough probable cause that the arrest was made. So let's hope it wasn't a bad arrest. Like, let's just assume that was the case, because by and large, that is how it works. What am I going to do? Now, if you're super destitute, you can beg the judge, but this is, this judge hears like 4,000 cases a single day, right? What are you going to say that's different than the last 5 people that were in here crying, over the same thing? At the same rate, the flip side, I think you gave me as well, which was, and then certain crimes of a level above with this proposed change, you bond isn't even an option. Well, now you just did the exact same thing, but now you made it so they can't go back, even if they had the $5,000, they can't continue their life. So what are the consequences of that? Like, let's say the person gets found innocent at the end of all this for whatever reason. In the meantime, they've lost their job, their house is being repossessed, like all their stuff is out on the curb. Like, what? So that's why I have an issue. No,
interesting.
Can we do something with bond so it's not, so it's somewhere within the realm of what the average person might have in surplus cash, which, let's all be honest, sometimes is zero, right? What can we do to find a balance, in there for society?
As a percentage of maybe their bank account or
something, right? There clearly we can do something, slightly different. Can we do something that, is along the lines of what you just read me? The big problem that I have in that one is, oh, congratulations, you've been accused of committing a state jail felony or above. No bond for you. What the hell? Like, I've only been accused of a crime. I haven't even been found guilty. I haven't even presented any evidence of that. But the actual consequences of the fact that I'm stuck here for weeks and I can't work and so forth are astronomical, right? So yeah, but it's the exact same problem of the person, even for a minor crime, who just doesn't have the money to post bond, right? You're going to cause them impact as well. So there has to be some way to look at that. I'm not learned it enough, and I haven't had enough time looking at that argument to have.
I'm glad I asked that question. So there's this concept of legislating from the bench. I think there's a similar thing, and I would love to hear your take on it, about legislating from the cop car, where you get to decide, as you said, whether this person goes home or whether they stay in the cop car.
Yeah.
How much do you think that really happens, where someone says, like, I just don't like this crime. I just don't, this isn't my favorite crime. There's some crimes I'm all about, but this one,
I mean, again, police officers are people, right? So you will find certain police officers that have crimes that just trigger them, right? And I don't mean trigger them in a bad way, but that's like the crime. Like if you did that, I'm taking you to jail.
Sure.
Right. I think almost universally, anything involving harming a child, they're going to decide to take you to jail.
Sure.
Right. If there's enough probable cause to show that you did it, they're taking you to jail. You stole a loaf of bread to feed your family. By and large, probably most of them are going to look at you and go, we're going to write you. I'm going to figure out how to do this so I can write you just a ticket for doing that. Right. A summons or a warning or something. I'll work it out. Right. And again, the officer may even look at your actual financial situation as you talk to them and go, I'll make it a warning so you don't have to pay a fine and whatever. So, I don't know if that's legislating so much because you're not changing the laws. Yeah.
Obviously, it's not really
selectively enforcing.
Yeah.
Right. And that comes back to, at least in Texas, that comes back to that whole peace officer mentality. Right. We used to have a joke before legislation changed in the state where it used to be any usable amount of marijuana was a Class B misdemeanor, right? And then it got higher with more weight. But any usable, it literally meant any, except stems and seeds were the only things that didn't count, right? So I found, a little bit left in the end of your one hit pipe. You're going to jail. Right, 6 months in jail. Congratulations. Police officers 20 years ago, even in the country, but definitely in the cities and so forth, would find that and look at you and go, all right, I'm going to write you a citation for possession of drug paraphernalia. Right, that's literally the citation, which is like the equivalent of running a stop sign. Right, you're going to pay a fine. I'm going to seize the one hit pipe, so on and so forth. We're going to destroy it. We're going to check it into evidence, but it's be checked in for destruction, not being held for an investigation, right? So nobody's keeping your one hit pipe, which is always a weird thing that people point out. But I'm going to write you a Class C ticket, same thing that you would get if you were jaywalking or whatever else, right? And that was the way police officers handled it for a very long time. Right. It wasn't an amount they were distributing. It was obviously a personal amount of marijuana. And most police officers were like, so you get mellow and you tell me about how we're all, dust inside of a marble. And then you just take a nap. I don't see why that's a problem. Right. And they wouldn't bust you up for it. Right. Again, that's that peace officer view on things. I can charge you for what I can prove. Right. I can prove that you had drug paraphernalia. Right. I can play dumb and act like I can't prove it was marijuana inside of it. And I'll write you the citation. So you see a lot of that always takes place. Right. And again, that comes back to that humanization. I want police officers as a citizen. I want police officers to be able to, again, look at what is the spirit of the law versus the letter of the law. Right? Do I consider that to be corruption? Do I consider that whatever? By and large, no. When I see a judge legislate from the bench, they're creating laws that don't exist, right? And so that to me is completely different because that's not how our system is supposed to work.
Different, but you can see why they're in some ways quite similar. I mean, if the judge says this is the law and cops don't enforce it, and is it the law,
Well, I mean, yes and no. I mean, we all also as a society recognize the fact that we have a lot of law. I mean, we have a lot of laws. I don't know if you've seen the books. There's a lot of laws, thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of laws. I remember.
How many are there?
Oh my God, I don't know a number.
I would love to find somebody who just actually
knows that number.
Oh, it's 5,380, whatever the number is.
Some crazy number. Yeah. I know that the transportation code itself, all the reasons I can pull you over and write you a ticket, the book, cadets aren't given physical books anymore. They get them all as PDFs, which is nice because they're quickly searchable.
Sure.
But I'm so old that when I did it, we still got books. And you had this big bag that you had to carry them with, and it was like a workout. Because the transportation code itself was bigger than a phone book, right? Thousands of pages. And I was out with a field training officer when I was first starting, and he was like, if you can't figure out a reason to pull anyone over in 5 minutes, you just simply haven't read enough of the laws in the transportation code. Because like literally I could drive behind anybody, pull them over and be like, blah, 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 if I knew it well enough. Like everything is covered in there, from like the height of the lights from the ground to the spacing between them, how many of them, what colors should they be, like everything is covered inside, and any one of those things is a reason to pull you over and write you a ticket. So
it's not the right shade of red.
Not the right. Yeah, I mean, it's yellow, not red, right? Like you see people change the lenses all the time because they're doing it because they like the stylization of the car. Do I pull them over for that? No. Could I? Yes. Am I changing the law by not doing that? No, but at the same rate, it's probably some 19-year-old in the car, or some 20-year-old in the car, and he thought it looked cool to change the lenses out so they're all smoky black, right? And now all of them have white bulbs behind them, and as another driver, I'm supposed to figure out, is he turning or stopping, right? Kind of thing. You look at criminal law, right? When I went through the police academy, we were instructed, absolutely do not arrest two men for sodomy. Yes, it's against the law. Do not arrest them for it.
Interesting.
Right. At the time, of course, the Supreme Court had ruled that was unconstitutional, but Texas hadn't taken it out of the law. There's also other weird laws in the state of Texas. If you own more than a certain number of dildos, that's a crime. Great.
I would love to hear the story about where you
I am not going around
popped into somebody's bedroom.
Aha! I have nothing else to arrest you on, but I see there are 5 of those. You're only allowed to have 3.
What are you holding behind your back, ma'am?
Yes.
So one of the things that has kind of always worried me about these types of laws in general is one day things are completely legal and the next day they're not. So in Colorado, for instance, one day if you pulled someone over and they had a certain amount of drug paraphernalia on them, they go to jail. The very next day, for whatever reason, some law got passed and now it's completely okay.
Yeah.
And if we don't allow a certain amount of latitude for the general population to commit crime, it sounds weird, but it's true. Commit certain amount of crime, or visibly protest against laws that are, I'm not going to say bad laws because that implies sort of a moral standing on it, and I don't really want to do that. But laws that they don't find just or don't agree with or whatever, you're never going to get those laws passed. And not that I think necessarily that law is good or bad. I'm just saying, in general, one day drinking alcohol was bad and the next day it was fine in the United States.
Literally.
Yeah. And that is a very dangerous thing to decide, that this by fiat, the government gets to decide this thing is bad and you can never do it. And therefore it is done. And anybody who shall dare have a drink is suddenly, needs to go to jail. Obviously there's certain places where I think the government needs to step in and protect people from themselves. Like if they're literally about to throw themselves off a building would be a good example, or, about to shoot somebody else or something,
Absolutely.
By virtue of some drugs they're on or whatever. And that type of intervention makes
driving
a lot
the
of sense.
wrong way down a highway.
There's
things,
lots of
all
examples.
These things.
Yeah. Lots of examples of that. But I'm also very wary of the fact that a lot of these laws are based on some morality and not based on real actual fact. And that's where I start going, ugh.
And again, that's where you see a lot of police officers, again, going to the spirit of the law versus the letter of law, right? And that humanity and that subjectiveness gets to come in for them to make that decision, right? Is this a morality thing, right? During the late 90s and early 2000s was, writing somebody a ticket for possession of drug paraphernalia when they had marijuana a morality call because, oh my God, they had marijuana, right? Or is it a realistic thing where that person smoking marijuana was actually a threat to society? Right? Well, what were they doing? Were they operating a motor vehicle? Then yes, I see that as no different than if they were drinking alcohol. Were they, I don't know, sitting in a cul-de-sac playing a guitar and smoking, a doobie? All right. not bothering anybody, right? Like, it's not hurting himself really at the end of the day. It's not like he was sitting there shooting up methamphetamine or smoking methamphetamine or, whatever, doing heroin on the end of the thing and leaving needles all over the ground or something like that. Right. He was, smoking a little bud and playing his guitar and not bothering anybody. Right. So I agree with you right there. And that's one of the reasons I've always liked policing in Texas, is just because there is that leeway to look at things and say, the humanity of this is that, you don't get arrested.
It sounds like more states should do something similar.
Yeah.
So before I round out that whole thing, I know I use the word cops a lot, and I have been told by someone who's very close to me that is a semi-offensive term, and I just realized I probably used it quite a bit during this part of the interview.
Yeah.
So do you find that offensive when someone says cops versus police officer? Or?
I don't.
Okay. Sorry, I certainly wouldn't want to have offended you this whole time.
I've never even heard it. And there's some people that for whatever reason take offense to it, but I think that's more of a modern thing, because it derives from calling police officers coppers, and cops is the short version. And they were called coppers because the buttons on their uniforms and the badge was all copper.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah.
So, that's just a throwback thing. It's weird. So
I'll have to beg forgiveness from my the person I know who's would be offended by my use of that, but I'm glad I didn't offend you.
Yeah,
so
no,
it's good.
Not at all.
So let's change the topic entirely to what you're doing these days.
Excellent.
Which I know is a bit of a departure, but it's you.
I was doing it even in parallel to
I know, which is, that's why it's so funny, because I knew you day one, hour one is one thing, and a couple 20 minutes, 30 minutes later, I found out you did this other thing. And so this is just your life here.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you want to talk about your current job, what you do.
Or what I do for a living. So, since as long as I can remember, since leaving high school, I've done computer work, right? So high tech work. And before we really called it, had a name for it. I guess I was a hacker, right? And, have done information security and security research my entire life, computer forensics, big time IP protection and large scale security for very large entertainment companies. Before I went into law enforcement, which is why I ended up in law enforcement, doing law enforcement work, is I was working for Electronic Arts. I was heading up their information security, which was their very early fledgling version of what they have today. Because this is late 90s, early 2000s, 20-something years ago. And in doing that, I've had a fantastic career moving through computer games, motion pictures, pure security research for a while, which is, I think, about the time you and I met, where I was breaking other people's security toys for a living. And then went back into the corporate world and, do security for everything from casino gaming to casual games like I was doing at EA.
So before we jump into some of the questions I've got, what do you think is the state of gambling these days? Is it doing well? Is it a fairly secure thing compared to days of old where you could, kind of walk over and play a couple magic tricks with, some...
you mean like trying to be crafty in the... That's actually not the part of security that I deal with, which probably means I'm actually allowed to talk about it a little bit from what I know, because it fascinates me. Just like you asking that question, I can tell that it fascinates you. Yeah. The technology and what they do on the gaming floor, right, is amazing. From physical gambling with cards and so forth, there's cameras literally everywhere. They have experts that are watching. They have algorithms that now watch and so forth, or aid and assist and so forth. That is all just really, really fascinating to me. The gaming commissions themselves I think are fantastic. They generally watch out very well for all parties involved in what's happening, and nobody likes cheating, right? Because it throws off everything, all aspects. The casino, of course, doesn't like it because of the financial implications to the casino. The gaming commissions don't like it because, of course, the implications to the consumer market, right? The rest of us don't like it because then the casino's going to get money back somehow, right? So. Or it's going to go out of business, and maybe I really like that casino, right? I don't want to see them go out of business. So, what we wind up seeing there is just a lot of tech, a lot of experts. I find it really cool when I get to sit down with security heads and security individuals from the large casino gaming groups, and I get to hear all the really cool stories of what their general day is. It's as fascinating as you would think it is. Yeah.
So is there, just for the audience, because I know they're going to wonder, is there the one slot that's the very loose one that I can walk over and win a ton of money on, or is it much more algorithmically, is it more even than that?
What I can share with you is that the use and how systems are set up in casinos are all regulated by the gaming commission of that jurisdiction. So the slots, so to speak, won't be different drastically enough to cause you to be like, oh my God, that one over there, right, is just, it's corrupt, or there's a problem with it. The coding standards and the quality control standards are there that it's not, and it must conform with the levels that have set, right? So it can't be set to just take money. Like, that would be illegal,
sure,
right?
It can be set to give money. That's everyone's question.
Yeah. Also within parameters, right? So you can't suddenly attract a bunch of people into your place of business by quote unquote setting them so that they're paying out, I don't know, like 40% of the time or something like that, So yeah.
Gotcha.
You also wouldn't stay in business for very long if you did it.
Yeah. There's always the superstitious amongst us, who really believe it. That's how it's going to work. This one's going to be the winner.
I do believe I'm allowed to share that it's an algorithm, right? So there's definitely math going on behind it. Sure. And those parameters exist, which should tell you that the parameters therefore can be measured, right? So there are times that, it's got to give back, right? Now it doesn't magically then change the way that it's playing the game, so it suddenly pays out for a while, right? It's just statistically the way that the algorithm is set up, it will pay out and it will collect.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Gotcha. So you might have noticed there's a war going on in Ukraine, and Russia has decided to move in for a variety of reasons. They believe that that's a good idea. What do you think the security industry should know about that, or sort of react to when you have sort of this very kinetic war that affects us in all kinds of strange ways, from supply chain management issues to, there's a lot of, we'll get to it in a second, but there's it's new cyber army being created, the Ukrainian Cyber Army, that is actually made up of effectively volunteers from all over the world.
Yeah.
How do you think about that?
I don't think you're asking me what I think about the cyber army, because I'm that sounds cool. Sign me up.
We'll get to that in a second.
That was me being joking. I'm not going to go.
I'll get to that. I'll get to that in a second. But I'm more curious how enterprises should be thinking about this. And
I think there's several aspects that we should probably be paying attention to here. First and foremost, the more we see any state-sponsored formalization of cyber armies, right, means that we are always going to end up with, assuming they're training people, not just collecting already trained people that want to volunteer, we're always going to end up with a spilling out later of more individuals that have been taught to work offensively, right? Let's just get to the middle of that. Not they're not hiring them to configure firewalls to keep people out, right? So we are always, therefore, they're going to be facing a future where there's just more and more trained individuals that do offensive security versus defensive security, right? And many of them can apply that to defensive security. But we all should be making sure that we're now paying attention to the fact that our futures is looking like those of us that are security practitioners, where our job assurance is getting better, for one thing. The other aspect of that is, we probably as corporations need to watch what is happening, right? So these things do not get contained to, for example, government A attacking government B cybernetically on their industrial control services for, their power plant, right? Yeah, they do that too, but it's not where it's just staying, right? Maybe disrupting that country also means disrupting some of their larger corporations.
Yeah, suppliers.
Right? The suppliers and so forth of the munitions, parts, pieces, so on and so forth of what they're doing, right? So we've always seen that in the United States as being part of our critical infrastructure, right? So
and supply chain.
And supply chain is part of that critical infrastructure as that umbrella continues to grow and what is defined underneath that. So what's very interesting there is, you look at it and you go, okay, that's great, but does it spill further than the immediate supply chain, right? Do they go after the actual economy, right? So are there companies or corporations or business verticals that supply a large percentage of revenue generation for country A while country B is attacking it, right? Where they could undermine that, and that's slowing down cash flow, taxes, tax collection, financial ability as well, right? Over and beyond the supply chain of, let me make sure they can't make hand grenades, right?
Sweden's out of luck.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Sweden and their hand grenades. Can't wait till next time I'm in Sweden. I'm going to walk up to everybody like, can I see your hand grenades? My friend said you have some. That's really weird. It's like when my European friends visit and they want to see handguns. Yeah. I'm like, here's some handguns. And they're like, that's so amazing. I go to Sweden and they're like, can I see your hand grenades? So, these are all starting points of what to look at, right? Other aspects are, if you look at, your tabletop exercises that you're doing and so forth, for like, how are we going to handle some event that impedes our business, right? And you look at every tabletop exercise that's done, it's, currently we all do a lot of them on ransomware, right? And these same groups will do ransomware, right?
And for those who don't know what that is.
It's malware that infects a network and systems, encrypts them, and then pops up on the screen. If you send X millions of dollars or whatever in Bitcoin or whatever they're asking for to a certain location, they'll give you the decryption key and you can decrypt your systems and use them again. So it's a little bit worse than deleting everything because your systems are still there. They're just pointless. And
the bad guy might have all that data too.
And the bad guy will exfiltrate the data because that's the new escalation of it. And they're also using it in a play to, out you and your dirty laundry and your secrets by saying, pay the ransom, we'll give you the decryption key. And you're like, well, that's nice, but I have a backup, so I'll just restore it. And no. And they're like, oh, but by the way, I have all of your email. And if you don't pay the ransom, I'm posting that up online. They don't even look at the email, but of course you are a human being. So you're all like, well, there was like that one woman that I wrote to that isn't actually my spouse. And I might've said a thing, so you're just like, fine, I'll pay you. Yep. Right. So it's now more of an extortion than a ransom.
Sure.
But it's held as a ransom. And so that's the tip of the iceberg. But most corporations focus very heavily on that because it is also the number one type of large-scale attack that we're seeing. They'll tabletop exercise natural disasters, right? Fire, hurricane, earthquake, force majeure, aspects. They'll terroristic aspects, right? Something happened even in the city that they're in, right? Employees can't come into the office, that kind of thing. You rarely see a private corporation role-playing, and then we get invaded, right? Or the office that we have in a location or manufacturing plant or whatever it is, or employees, right, can't do what they're supposed to be doing because there's an attack, right? This is human, and unlike most of these other things that we've talked about, where there's like you're moving along and everything's normal, an event happens. The event happened. It's short term usually, and then we're back to normal. So I really have to plan for and fix like this spike, right? War doesn't have, usually speaking, a spike. I mean, I don't want to get into the reasons or rationale behind what's going on with Russia and the Ukraine, but I think one thing we've all heard conclusively from anybody doing analysis on it, right? The Russian government rolled in and thought it was going to be 3 days, right? That's what they planned for. That's what they prepped for, right? And we're on how many months now, right? That
It's
they
about
also
a half a year.
Yeah, they also didn't have a spike. Yeah, that was February, right?
Yeah,
So they also didn't have a spike, right? So they're also on the converse side dealing with the fact that this is just persistent, right? And ironically, if you look at it from their perspective of business continuity and disaster recovery, right? They're bleeding cash. There's no more income coming in, right? They're running out of supplies, or their supplies are breaking down, right? So then they have extra costs, extra time, and so forth. Convert it, and that's a business.
This is actually quite a bit different. I'm assuming companies like yours do tabletop exercises now about COVID, for instance. Like,
yes.
What if no one gets to show up at work at all?
Yeah.
But this is a little bit different because companies might have employees in one war-torn region or the other or both. So you actually have to kind of analyze it from multiple different dimensions. You're like, well, what happens if my marketing team happens to be in some random country and they can't do marketing anymore? Or what if you can't trust their marketing anymore because they are working potentially with the adversary or whatever. So I don't know how that plays out from a tabletop perspective. Like, what do you do? Like, it just
I've never actually seen a tabletop exercise that's that complex.
Yeah.
Right. Because if you even looked at it from that aspect, the next angle that you might want to use is, well, that's great, but why just talk about A and B? Like if A invades B and there's a conflict, it also affects C, D, E, F, G, H, and I, right? Like, well, what the heck? Maybe we don't have a business in A or B, but we have a business in C, but now C's dealing with a refugee influx, right? That's causing problems. I don't know, maybe crime spiked through the roof or, whatever, right? But you don't see those conversations happening very often in very many corporations because the focus, and probably rightfully so, because mathematically it's more statistically plausible, right? You're dealing with other insider threat type issues. You're dealing with force de jour issues. You're dealing with, other aspects in supply chain. Since the last couple of years, we're also looking at things like, you have a software supplier down the line that makes a major product that we use. They got infiltrated and malware, and then the malware was installed by us unwittingly.
So that kind of brings me up the next part of this is Balkanization is one of those things that I think it's just going to get worse and worse and worse and worse. Like right now, we already have different firewalls manufactured in different locations that are only allowed to be used in those locations or not allowed to be used in others or whatever through sanctions, let's say. But I think it's going to get worse than that. I think there's just going to be a mug manufacturer in the United States, and that's the one we trust, and we can't trust a mug manufacturer somewhere else. Or more practically,
I only will drink out of the mugs from the company we got these mugs from. These are the best mugs ever.
But more practically, operating systems.
Yeah.
Why is everyone trusting operating systems that are built in the United States? Microsoft Windows being the primary, or Mac OS, let's say, and to a lesser extent, even Linux. I mean, why isn't every contributor to Linux in every single country. Why aren't we distributing this out all over the place? And
I've never actually really looked into it because it's one of those things where you just take it for granted. But
North Korea has their own Redstar operating system.
That wasn't where I was going with this. Where I was going with this was, I've worked at a lot of software development companies throughout my entire career, and rarely have I ever worked on any one product that was made in only one country, right? So you made that comment, and I thought to myself for a second, I was like, are all the programmers and developers that work on Microsoft Windows located in the United States?
Definitely
that can't possibly be correct.
It's not true.
Right. Yeah. But, so I was like, then my brain quickly jumped to, well, yeah, different pieces have code being worked on by people in all different countries with all different views and all different aspects. And it's very hard to do code sanitization, right?
Extremely.
Very, very, very hard.
Well, in the case of, I've got stories about both of these. So in the case of Redstar operating system, I actually found issues in the Nanera browser, which is one of the reasons I would probably never be allowed to visit that country.
Sure.
Despite being, once I was actually offered, like, would you like to go on a special tour? And I'm like, I don't think so. That would not be wise.
Was it a 3-hour tour in a little island?
I don't think so. But then on the Windows side, I remember I was going to, there was an invite-only conference called Blue Hat that Microsoft puts on. It's sort of their version of this big security conference for all of their employees.
Sure.
So they can talk more openly amongst themselves and with security researchers. And I went there. But before I went, it was maybe a week or two before, and I hadn't told anyone I'm going to this thing. I mean,
right.
I think maybe I told my now wife at the time, and maybe my business partner. And that's it. The only other people who knew were at Microsoft, and that, there's no one else who knew this. Not even my admin at the time. No one knew. It hadn't percolated out. It wasn't so much a hiding thing. And also I was pretty good at OPSEC and where I'm going and why I'm going, et cetera. But I got this message on one of my chat boards that I was a member of or whatever. And it's like, hey, you're going out to Microsoft. I'm like, well, this is a board for black hats. Yeah. What do you, you're kind of sort of trolling or what's going on? And he's like, oh, well, let's talk when you get here. I'm like, you literally work at Microsoft. He's like, yeah, I'll come up after the talk. I'm like, okay. So after the talk was over, this guy comes up to me and he's like, hey, I'm so-and-so from this board. And I'm like, are you really a black guy? It's like, oh yeah, I just do it for fun or whatever, blah, blah, blah. And he's kind of telling me some stuff. And I'm like, I'm really hoping he's like on the marketing team or something, or, just some sales droid or whatever.
Right.
He's like, no, I'm on the kernel team. And so for those who don't know, that's like the lowest level part of the operating system. Yeah. And so this guy's extraordinarily technical, like really knows what he's talking about.
Has to be. He's doing zero kernel.
Right. Yeah. And so it doesn't matter if your operating system is only in the United States. You have that guy, he may not be in China, but doesn't matter. He's a black hat. So I don't necessarily think Balkanization solves the problem that people are after. Not to mention you can have spies who go across the country lines and infiltrate in all kinds of different ways. But at the same time, there's a lot of SaaS out there, software as a service out there, that I could see people going, I really don't want to put all of our eggs in that one basket. If that thing goes offline, or if it's in a country that it's kind of a little dangerous, just like we think that there might be war breaking out in this area in the next year or two, or it's very close to a conflict zone, so it might spill over onto them. Like, why don't we just build this over here? Why don't we just have a local version? Yeah. Which, of course, the local governments are going to sponsor and say, yeah, that's great. We've got our own version. It's a national pride thing, as well as, why are we sending our money overseas? Why not spend it here? It's better localized and all that kind of thing that you might expect from something that's made in your own country. But I also think that that's really dangerous, because now we're going to have this massive fracturing of the internet. It's just going to get more and more and more fractured. Like, what do you?
Yeah, we're also going to have, nation flavored SaaS applications, right? So, who knows, maybe country Y decides they're not using Salesforce, they're going to build their own, right? And it's going to be run and operated only within, that country, right? For businesses that run in this country, right? And that's then Can you imagine RSA at that point when you walk through the sales floor gauntlet and they're like, no, it's okay. You should use our firewall. We're the firewall from Texas. And you're like, yeah, but we're a California company. Like, where does that stop? Right.
I think it's happening.
Yeah.
I think it's happening already.
You know, and you're like, well, yeah, we want to use another Texas company because we trust Texas. I'm using state names instead of country names just to say,
but it's identical. It's the same problem.
It's exactly. Yeah.
It's just more pronounced when it's across country lines.
Yeah. You know, and you know, you do see that, right? Some of that comes from the standpoint of, I guess, nationalism and wanting to help your countrymen get ahead, right? You know, you're like, oh man, I know a guy who started a new identity access management, IAM, you know, SaaS-based product. You know, I want to use that. Well, you don't want to use Okta or, you know, OnePass or any of the other things that are out there. No. I want to help this guy out because he's here. Now that happens, right? Because that's a normal level, I think, of patriotism and so forth that you see sometimes with people. But I think you're right. That does get scary, right? And what does that do? Because I like when we're all working together and building a better utopian society everywhere, right? You know, are there security advantages to that? I don't know, right? Because you're like, well, yeah, if you could keep the operating system super top secret and the only people that ever see it or use it are the people on that specific network, like let's say it's the government, copy is going to get out, right? And if you do it to the mass market, obviously a copy got out, right? So you're back where you started,
yeah,
right? They'll reverse engineer it, or at some point they'll get source code and so on and so forth.
I remember Microsoft was really very nervous about their bits, the actual underlying operating system components getting out. And so, I mean, it's too late. That has already happened probably hundreds of times.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe doesn't hit the public internet normally, but you know, these things do have a tendency to leak out. So the Ukrainian Cyber Army, they claim is 400,000 people strong now.
Wow. They just enlist like all of Anonymous and they actually put their names down. Like,
I think
Anonymous 142, Anonymous 500.
Yeah, I think that is largely what happened. Yes. But also a lot of people within the country. I mean, Ukrainians have a lot of very technical people there. There's
oh yeah, absolutely.
Very I've worked with contractors there, for instance, very technical, very smart. So, but my concern is attribution of who is attacking who has now become way more complicated.
Oh, horribly complicated, because your cyber army, as you mentioned, aren't Ukrainians and they're not in the Ukraine, right? They're not wearing uniforms. They're not confined to, you know, rules and so forth. You don't have to declare this was us, right? It's cybernetic guerrilla warfare, right? And it's a free for all.
The problem with that, generally speaking, when countries really feel like other countries are getting involved in wars, they tend to then start engaging them in war.
That is correct.
And, you know, to some extent, Russia has already done some saber rattling, which I would totally expect in this situation, that they might actually go thermonuclear if they are so provoked to do so. If we're sending random citizens to go into this cyber war, you know, they're out of the comfort of their own home, naturally, but still coming from American soil, it's going to be really difficult to tell which ones are the NSA or CIA or, you know, some other secret shadowy agency or whatever.
Right.
And which ones are just some random guy who just wants to help out.
Yeah, or a random guy now who used to work for one of these other groups that still implements the same tradecraft, which now throws everything off, right? So when you're doing those kind of investigations and you're looking for that tradecraft and telltales and so forth to try and give, you know, some form of accreditation back, or where did this come from? And was this a nation state? Was it those guys, or was it like dude number 4 living in his mother's basement that was just bored and whatever, right? You know, that it gets messy, gets fast. Right. And, you know, 400,000.
That's kind of an insane number.
That That is an absolutely insane
That's one
number.
of the largest armies on Earth.
Yeah.
And it's just comprised of largely volunteers from all over the place.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
So that's, I wonder if they give them all like a version of like, some hacker tool or something with like a little Ukrainian flag on it and,
I don't know.
something.
I don't know.
So,
I half want to enlist just to see what it's like.
I don't, but
yeah, me neither. But
yeah.
at the same time, kind of half want to.
Yeah.
So there's this kind of thing going around, and I've heard enough people say it now. I think it's sort of out, which is there's this concept of a cyber marque, MARQUE.
Okay.
I don't know if you've heard this.
No.
So back in the olden days, when we wanted to, let's say, have some of our privateers, some individual who with a boat go attack so-and-so, we would sort of say, look, you're flying under our banner. Mm-hmm. We realize you're not the military. You're not a regular.
Okay, gotcha.
But you're allowed to go attack this foreign vessel.
So a privateer.
Yes.
Okay.
So you go attack them. You're allowed to take whatever booty you find and bring it back. It's yours. But we need all the battle plans and anything else you find.
Gotcha.
And you're obviously only allowed to attack them. Don't attack us, or you're not a pirate. You're specifically going after them, right?
Right.
So there is a concept, a very similar concept called a cyber marque, which is being floated around as a potential. And
so you can become a cyber privateer.
Correct.
And keep whatever digital goodies you get.
Yes.
Okay. Which I'm hoping are huge Bitcoin wallets.
But it's targeted.
Yeah.
You have to go after these very specific targets. You can't go after everybody. You have to go after these nation states or these specific, crime organizations, cartels, let's say, whatever. You're allowed to do whatever you want. And you have to hand all this money over in some way back to the treasury.
Okay.
Now, you're going to take a good chunk off the top, right? That's going to be yours. You're not going to pay taxes on it. And frankly, you probably don't want anyone knowing that you are the ones who did that. So you're going to take a lot of precautions to make sure that isn't you, at least in any digital sense, right? What do you think about that?
Wow, what a fun, the most awesome, massively multiplayer game.
Isn't it? Is this a weird simulation we're living in?
I was thinking the whole time, wow, I could see spending a lot of hours, but then you actually have something out of it.
Yes.
That's, I think this is only the tip of the iceberg, right? I think as time progresses, we are going to continue to see ways of leveraging and implementing things like this, right? Probably for the same reasons that you saw privateer actions happening, right? You couldn't have a navy big enough, right? But you could get somebody with their own boat and a few cannons to go enforce your will over an area, not necessarily 100% linked to you, but working on your behalf, and you legalized that action and took a portion of it, right? And they profited. Chances are they were going to pirate anyway. Mm-hmm. So, now you've quasi-legitimized it, and, they can hold their head high in society. So will we exit that for the same reason that we exited using privateers? I think that's the real question, but how long will that take? And are we just at the beginning of it, and will it really come to full fruition?
I think it will. I think it maybe already has.
Mm-hmm.
There's enough people talking about it and very seriously talking about it.
Yeah.
Not wouldn't it be interesting if, nor oh, here's what we would plan on doing kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, I think one of my massive problems with it is it all comes down to their ethics, because all they have to say is not that target, but that target right there. And all of a sudden this thing turns and no, don't worry about it. I will get this over the treasury,
right.
Don't stress about it.
Yeah.
Now, to some extent, there's a nice part about being on the good side of the law, and you can sleep at night, et cetera, et cetera. The dollar figures they're talking about are so astronomical.
Oh, they'd have to be.
You could easily live happily ever after somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
These are not small dollar amounts. So you rely entirely on the ethics of your team to do the right thing, which is a little dangerous because these people have already said that they're cool with being pirates effectively. The other thing is, I don't think you ever get out of that job.
Right.
I think you're stuck doing that job for the rest of your life, effectively.
Yeah. Unless, like you said, you cash out and you just walk. I mean, completely. Like
Literally
you just don't
walk
use
away.
computers anymore. You're just like, I'm done. Like, okay. You know, I'm going to go become a ghost.
Yes.
You know,
I think that's the only option to get out of that. And so for those thinking about doing this, if there are any, I think, you get that job and you're working for the government effectively, whether you think you are or not. And you stay working for them for as long as.
That's the very definition of a privateer. Right. So,
Right. But unlike a traditional privateer, you just say, I'm not really cool like blowing up ships anymore, and you just call it a day. I don't think you get out of this job doing that.
I don't think so. And it's also just, I'm still shocked over the whole 400,000 people in the Ukrainian Cyber Army, right? It's just an astronomical number of people.
I know, right?
Yeah. I'm a little bit scared there's 400,000 people that have the skill set to be in a cyber military.
Probably not. I mean, I would assume a lot of them are doing administrative work and sorting and translations. And
that makes me feel, I was like, there's 400,000 superly effective hackers?
But there probably are that
I'm
many.
Unplugging everything now.
There probably are that many. In fact, there are probably more than that just in China alone.
Yeah.
But it's very interesting to see them kind of pop up and say, okay, we're going to go attack this one target all at once. One other story you told me once upon a time was how you did some analysis to identify people like warfighters and figure out like even where they lived or whatever. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Would you be willing to share a little bit about that story?
Yeah,
I think that's kind of relevant to this.
I can talk a little bit about that.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. There's we have a mutual friend. I believe you know him. Before Orange Security was called Orange Security, it was SensePost. And one of their researchers built this really cool thing for a while called Snoopy, which was just a great way of, much like a Pineapple and stuff does today, spoofing access point SSIDs based off of broadcasts that come from the client. And, I played with a bunch of his scripts and, as you do with scripts, you optimize them and so forth, and utilized a lot of what he was doing, and you throw them through different databases like Waggle, and you get which cross-references it to war driving data, which is when hackers drive around or people, I shouldn't say hackers, drive around and with GPS units and Wi-Fi antenna arrays, and they map out the SSIDs of access points, and it marks their GPS locations, and they go to a giant database, right? And just for giggles, apparently, because there's no monetization of it that I know of, other than access to Waggle. And you could spoof any SSID that was out there because the device is asking for it. Now that's used a lot in man-in-the-middle attacks, or it used to be before modern TLS versions instead of HTTPS. But I didn't care about man-in-the-middling. I cared about what access points you were looking for, and I cared about the MAC address and so forth on your mobile device, so I had a fingerprint for it. And I cared about putting all that into a relational database that I could then look at and say, okay, I've been to these 5 spots. I've seen your phone in all 5 spots because it's connected to my fake access point because I said I was at your house. And I also said I was at the Starbucks that you go to and the whatever you were going to, because as your phone asked if that network was there, my system came back and said, yes, I'm here. Right. Mm-hmm. And I could then very quickly extrapolate that I'd seen you at those different locations. But more importantly, I could take the SSIDs from where you were trying to connect to, waggle them, get the GPS locations, throw that into Google Earth, and then do a flyby of your house and everywhere else that you've been. So I was doing a demonstration of this at one point for a special operations group. And we were doing it as a example of operational security and when your devices kind of tattle on you. And we were invited to come out to the base prior to the demonstration, and then again the day of the demonstration. And during the entire time, I was collecting data on both different events because I wanted to show correlation between who was here both times. And in the background, my scripts were running and getting the GPS locations for the SSIDs and so forth. And we kind of looked at the data that was coming out, and I was looking at all the GPS locations for where these things were. And we were able to show them that we could discern which mobile devices belonged to the forward or advanced teams versus the support groups that stay behind, based upon the fact we could isolate which devices had been to Europe and other locations as well, right? So through process of elimination, there's probably some small percentage of fudge in there if somebody went, I don't know, to London on vacation or something and it was looking for stuff. But by and large, the isolation is there. And then, of course, we could isolate those devices, and then we can look at, the flyby of all the access points they've been to and then show their homes. And I kind of made the mistake of doing that live in front of this
a bunch of murderers,
a bunch of people trained to kill me with their pinky, kill me with my pinky. There were several of them that got up and went to the back room to the highest ranking officer that was back there and were not very pleased with what we had done. I assured them I was
to kill you.
I assured them I was deleting all the info before I left the building. But it was a good case in point that the device that you carry around with you will tell on you, right? And there were early implementations and uses of tools like pineapples, right, and so forth. And for those that don't know, it's a Wi-Fi security testing tool. I think we have to do it in air quotes. And it's called a pineapple because the first ones were physically hidden in pineapples as the centerpieces on tables at a conference. So nobody knew they were there. And they were doing this very similar techniques of collecting SSIDs. They were spoofing home networks so that mobile devices connected to them. And then people would use the mobile devices, not realizing they were on a Wi-Fi network, right? And of course, the device was man in the middling and stealing usernames and passwords to everything and keeping logs of where everybody went and what they did and so on and so forth while they were there. So hence the name of the device.
Yeah, and similar things have happened before with, I forget which app it was, but like a running app of some sort where a bunch of special operators were just running around the base, and there was like this perfect rectangle going over and over and over in the middle of middle of nowhere. Yeah. It's like, why there's a whole bunch of people running in the middle of nowhere
constantly in the same rectangle.
Exactly.
Yeah,
this rectangle over and over and over.
Yeah.
And so they were able to decloak certain bases. And a similar issue with, I don't know if this is true or not, but it makes for a funny story. A lot of people connecting, especially in Russia, coming into Ukraine, and they weren't able to use their existing telecoms for all kinds of reasons. So they started using local telecommunications, and then they're using Grindr, and then they're able to identify exactly where they are through geolocation.
And then they were setting up wet work projects to get them to come in. So the girl, air quotes, the girl would say, yeah, you can meet me here, blah 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 blah. Yep. They'd show up and yeah.
Very funny. All right. Well, this has been great. It's been about 2.5 hours now. So how do people find you online?
You can find me on Twitter. So there I'm always Frankly Frank, but it's FRANC at the end. You can find me on LinkedIn. I hide my Facebook account. That's the one I use just for friends and family and so forth.
What am I, chopped liver?
Yeah, you're on there. I think I'm linked to you on there. That's other than that, I really I have a you can find my GitHub if you want to go look at my bad code every once in a while. Otherwise I keep a very limited online social media thing.
Well, Frank, thank you for doing this and for being so candid. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you, my friend.
It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Cool.